for this one. Today we're diving into a story of resilience and the search for a home after a truly devastating event, the Assyrian resettlement efforts following the 1933 Simele massacre in Iraq. I mean, this massacre, it really shook the Assyrian community to its core. And we've got some fascinating sources for this deep dive. We've got historical analyses, British government records from the time, and even some media snippets. It really reveals the political climate surrounding the resettlement efforts.
It's just fascinating how this horrific event, it actually kind of became a catalyst for change. Before Simele, so many Assyrians, they still clung to this hope of returning to their ancestral lands in the Hakkari Mountains, or at least carving out, some autonomy within Iraq itself. Some had already begun to settle in Iraq and Syria, recognizing the difficulties of returning to Hakkari. But after the massacre, it made it clear what a more permanent solution somewhere outside Iraq was desperately needed.
So it really shifted the focus, right? From going back home to finding a safe haven, a new beginning. And that's where the League of Nations enters the picture, right? For those who might not know, the League of Nations was kind of like the precursor to the United Nations, global organization trying to maintain peace and resolve these international disputes.
Exactly, yeah. The League, they recognized the severity of the situation and formed the 6-member committee to kind of tackle this challenge. Their mission was to find a viable place to resettle the Assyrians, a place where they could rebuild their lives. They explored a number of options, but one country emerged as a particularly interesting contender.
Brazil. Okay, that caught me off guard. Mm-hmm. We often think of, places like Europe or North America as destinations for refugees, but Brazil, what made it a contender?
Well, Brazil at this time was actively encouraging, agricultural development. They had vast, sparsely populated areas that were perfect for farming. And the Assyrians, with their long tradition of agriculture, seemed like a potential asset. Plus, Brazil did have a history of accepting immigrants from, various parts of the world. But as we'll see, that history wasn't as straightforward as it might seem. The global landscape was changing in the 1930s. The Great Depression had sent these shockwaves throughout the world, and many countries, including Brazil, were grappling with economic anxieties and a surge in nationalism.
So how did this Brazil plan, how did it actually work? What were the terms?
Well, the proposal laid out some specific conditions. The Brazilian government stipulated that the Assyrians would have to, settle in organized groups dedicated to farming rather than dispersing throughout the country. This aligned with Brazil's push for agricultural development in these underpopulated regions. And crucially, they would have to relinquish their weapons and of course, adhere to Brazilian laws.
So it sounds like, at least on paper, there's potential for this to work, but you hinted that there's more to this story.
Yeah.
Was there opposition to the plan?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where things get really interesting and a little bit unsettling. You see, despite Brazil's history of immigration, this particular proposal encountered fierce resistance within Brazil itself.
Wait, internal opposition. But I thought you said Brazil had welcomed immigrants in the past.
They had, but this situation was different. It unfolded against a backdrop of rising nationalism and economic uncertainty. The Great Depression had hit Brazil hard, and anxieties about jobs, resources, and national identity were running high. This created fertile ground for anti-immigration sentiment to really take root.
So it wasn't just about the Assyrians themselves. It was about a broader shift in the global political climate.
Yeah.
But who are the key figures driving this opposition in Brazil?
Well, there was a mix of, grassroots anxieties and organized opposition, but certain influential figures really amplified the anti-immigration message. One of the most vocal opponents was a politician and writer named Eusébio de Oliveira. He was a prominent intellectual who subscribed to a nationalist ideology that emphasized preserving Brazil's racial and cultural purity.
So his opposition, it wasn't simply about economics or practical concerns. It was tied to a specific ideology, a world.
Exactly. De Oliveira, along with other prominent figures like Fela Salgado, a lawyer and journalist, they tapped into existing fears and prejudices within Brazilian society. They painted the Assyrians as backward and violent, claiming they would threaten Brazil's national identity and disrupt its social fabric.
That's disturbing. Do they have any real evidence to support these claims?
Sadly, no. Their arguments were largely based on unfounded fears and stereotypes. They used inflammatory rhetoric, claiming the Assyrians were accustomed to looting and plunder and would pose a threat to public order. These pronouncements were not rooted in any real evidence, but rather in harmful prejudices that cast the other as inherently dangerous.
It sounds like a classic us versus them tactic, right?
Yeah.
Creating a sense of threat to rally people against. What role did the media play in all of this? Did they help to spread these negative messages?
Absolutely. The media, and especially newspapers and radio broadcasts, they played a powerful role in shaping public opinion. And unfortunately, some outlets actively fueled the anti-Assyrian campaign.
Do you have any specific examples of how the media portrayed the Assyrians?
Some of the headlines and pronouncements were shocking, even by today's standards. One newspaper, Gazeta do Poro, published an article titled "The Assyrian Invasion," invoking this sense of fear and aggression. Another article called it "The Harmful Immigration," framing the Assyrians as a danger to Brazilian society.
It's just it's incredible how language can be used to dehumanize an entire group of people. They weren't an invasion. They were families desperately seeking safety and a new life.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder of how words can be weaponized to create fear and prejudice. These media outlets often played on the anxieties of the Brazilian public, highlighting the economic challenges of the time and implying that the Assyrians would somehow make things worse.
So it was a combination of, economic anxieties, a surge in nationalism, and this targeted campaign of misinformation that created this hostile environment. Was this opposition just a fringe movement, or did it have support from influential sectors of society?
Well, it's important to note that these anti-Assyrian sentiments weren't limited to a small radical group. They were espoused by respected members of society,
Yeah.
including politicians, lawyers, and even some academics. One particularly influential group was the National Society of Friends of Alberto Torres, a group largely composed of intellectuals, diplomats, and politicians. They published articles, gave speeches, and actively lobbied against the resettlement proposal, leveraging their social standing to sway public opinion.
So even with the League of Nations trying to find a solution, the Assyrians faced an uphill battle from the very beginning. Were there any voices in Brazil speaking out in support of the Assyrians, or were they completely isolated?
There were certainly individuals and groups who sympathized with the Assyrians' plight and recognized the injustice of this opposition. However, their voices were often drowned out by the louder, more organized anti-immigration campaign. It was a relentless effort that effectively demonized the Assyrians and painted them as a threat, despite any evidence to support those claims.
It's heartbreaking to think about what the Assyrians must have been going through at this time, already traumatized by the massacre, and then facing this wave of prejudice and rejection when they were simply looking for a safe place to rebuild their lives.
It's a poignant reminder of the challenges faced by displaced populations throughout history and even today. The search for refuge is often met with fear, suspicion, and sadly discrimination.
Huh.
And sometimes the very factors that make a country seem like a suitable destination, in this case Brazil's need for agricultural development, can become entangled with complex social and political dynamics.
So we have this perfect storm brewing: the global economic crisis, rising nationalism, and this targeted campaign of misinformation.
Yeah.
Did the Brazilian government try to push back against this opposition, Or did they ultimately cave to the pressure?
Oh, it was immense. A real, confluence of internal and external forces. Despite, initial signals of openness to the proposal, the Brazilian government ultimately buckled. In June 1934, they sent a formal communication to the League of Nations stating that the resettlement of Assyrians in Brazil was no longer feasible.
So the dream of a new life in Brazil for the Assyrians was officially shattered. What a devastating blow. Not just for them, but also for those within the league who were championing their cause.
Absolutely. It was a major setback. It really highlighted the complexities of finding, suitable resettlement locations. It wasn't just about identifying, land. It was about navigating, political climate, social attitudes, economic anxieties, all of these factors. They collided in the Brazil plan's failure.
It also shows that even with the best of intentions, international efforts can be derailed by these unforeseen internal pressures. But the search for a haven for the Assyrians didn't end there, right? I mean, the need was
Yeah.
still urgent. What happened next?
You're right. The story doesn't end there. The British, especially those sympathetic to the Assyrian cause, they continued to explore alternative locations. A few possibilities were considered, each with its own set of advantages and drawbacks. British Guiana in South America was one option. Being a British colony, it could have made things easier from an administrative standpoint.
That makes sense. But wasn't British Guiana very different, environmentally speaking, from what the Assyrians were used to? I'm thinking climate, terrain, even the types of crops they could cultivate.
That's a crucial point. The climate and terrain of British Guiana were indeed quite different from the Assyrians' traditional lands. This raised concerns about their ability to adapt, to truly thrive and build sustainable communities. Remember, the goal wasn't simply to relocate them. It was to give them a chance to rebuild their lives in a place where they could flourish.
So the environment itself had to be a good fit, not just any empty space on the map. Were there other locations on the table?
Well, Syria came up repeatedly. The Assyrians already had a presence there, and some felt that expanding those existing communities might be the most practical solution.
Wouldn't settling them among existing Assyrian communities in Syria have presented its own challenges? I'm thinking resource allocation, potential tensions with existing populations, that sort of thing.
You raise an excellent point. Integrating a large influx of refugees into existing communities would definitely have come with its own set of complications. There were also concerns about the political stability of the region.
Right. The Middle East was already a volatile region in the 1930s. Placing the Assyrians in the midst of that could have exposed them to further conflict and displacements. It's a tragic irony, right? Seeking refuge in a place that might not be much safer than the one they were fleeing. Did anyone consider trying to resettle them back in their original homeland, the Hakkari Mountains?
There were those who held on to that hope, but
Yeah.
but realistically, it was a long shot. The political landscape had shifted drastically, and returning to Hakkari would have required, international agreements and guarantees that were simply not on the table at the time. Sometimes even the most deeply held desires, like returning to one's ancestral home, are simply impossible to realize.
So with Brazil off the table and concerns about other locations, what ultimately happened? Were the Assyrians left scattered with no clear path forward?
Well, it wasn't quite that bleak. While a single large-scale resettlement plan never came to fruition, smaller scale efforts did take place. Some Assyrians were resettled in various parts of Syria and Lebanon, often with the support of Christian organizations that were sympathetic to their plight.
So a kind of patchwork solution emerged, with different groups finding refuge in different places.
Yeah.
But it must have been incredibly difficult for them, facing so much uncertainty, having their hopes dashed again and again.
It was an incredibly challenging period. The trauma of the Simele massacre,
Mm.
coupled with the difficulties of finding a permanent home, left an undeniable mark on the Assyrian community.
It's a reminder that even when international organizations and well-meaning individuals try to help, the search for refuge can be a long and arduous journey.
Hmm.
What happened to the Assyrians in the long run? Did they ever find a unified homeland, or did they remain dispersed?
Sadly, the Assyrians never achieved a unified, independent homeland. They remain a dispersed people with significant communities in countries like Iraq, Syria, Iran, Turkey, and across the diaspora.
It's a testament to their resilience that they've managed to maintain their cultural identity and traditions, even scattered across the globe.
Absolutely, and their story, while marked by hardship and displacement, is also a story of survival, adaptation, and a deep commitment to preserving their heritage. Their experience raises a question that resonates with us even today. How do we, as a global community, create a more just and humane approach to resettling displaced populations?
That's a great segue to our final part. Knowing what we do now about the complexities of resettlement, the political hurdles, and the potential for prejudice, how can we create a better path for displaced populations today?
Yeah.
Yeah, it really does feel like we're talking about something that's not just history, but a challenge we still face today. If we were to design a system for resettling these displaced populations, what would we need to keep in mind, knowing what happened to the Assyrians?
Well, it's a multifaceted problem, that's for sure. But I think there's some key lessons, we can draw from the Assyrian experience. The first and perhaps most important is recognizing the human element. These are real people with families, histories, dreams for the future. They're not just numbers on a spreadsheet or a problem to be solved. Their voices need to be heard. Their perspectives, they need to be central to any resettlement effort.
So it's not about imposing solutions, but rather working with the affected communities, right? To find solutions that are truly viable and sustainable. What else should we be thinking about?
Well, practical considerations are absolutely crucial. Suitable land, climate, resources. I mean, these things matter immensely for the long-term success of any resettlement plan. We can't just place people in an unfamiliar environment and expect them to thrive. We saw that with the concerns about British Guiana and even with Brazil, where the focus on agricultural development didn't necessarily align with the Assyrians' broader needs and aspirations.
Right. It's about finding a place where they can not only survive but rebuild their lives,
Right.
create communities, contribute to their new society. But even with the right environment, we saw how prejudice and fear can just derail even the best intentions. What can be done to address that?
You're absolutely right. The way the Assyrians were demonized in Brazil, the way fears were stoked through misinformation and inflammatory rhetoric. That's a stark reminder of the importance of the host society's role. Today, we need to actively cultivate welcoming environments, fostering understanding and acceptance of newcomers.
I wonder if this is where education and cultural exchange can play a vital role.
Hmm.
Breaking down stereotypes,
Yeah.
building bridges of communication,
Mm.
recognizing the value that diverse perspectives bring to a society.
Exactly. It's about creating a space where differences are seen as strengths, not threats. And this requires effort from both the host community and the resettled population to build those connections. Think about how different things might have been if the Brazilians had a chance to really learn about the Assyrians, their culture, their history, their resilience.
Yeah, it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
Building that trust and understanding. It takes time and a genuine commitment from everyone involved.
But even with that, wouldn't we still need a strong framework for international cooperation? I mean, the League of Nations was still a relatively new concept when this was happening with the Assyrians.
We absolutely need that framework. The Assyrians were seeking refuge at a time when global institutions were still evolving.
Mm.
Today we have organizations like the UN Refugee Agency,
Yeah.
which are dedicated to addressing these challenges on an international level. But even with those institutions, we still see situations where political roadblocks, funding shortages, and a lack of global will hinder resettlement efforts. So there's still work to be done, but we have a better foundation to build upon. It's about learning from past mistakes and working collectively towards a more just and compassionate approach to resettlement.
It's about remembering that these are not just historical events. The search for a safe haven is a reality for millions of people around the world today, and their stories, like the story of the Assyrians, deserve to be heard, understood, and acted upon.
Well, thank you for guiding us through this deep dive. It's been eye-opening to explore not just the historical events, but also the enduring challenges and what we can learn from them.
It's been a pleasure discussing this with you, and I hope our listener walks away with a renewed sense of awareness and a deeper understanding of the complex issues surrounding displacement and resettlement. It's a reminder that we can each play a part, however small, in creating a more welcoming and compassionate world for everyone.